There's something about GameCube titles that just stand out compared to games from other Nintendo generations. Double Dash, Melee, Sunshine, Prime, Strikers, and many, many more classics emerged from this era of gaming. And across the board, these are some of my favorite iterations of these well-established franchises. Whether it was adding new mechanics, changing the entire direction for the series, or establishing new and unique titles that fans still rave about today, the GameCube was a home for innovation and uniquely creative games compared to other generations of Nintendo consoles. Even among this lineup of exceptional GameCube experiences, there's one title that stands out in my mind, and the game I am thinking of was unfairly criticized and disliked among many Nintendo fans at the time of its release. I'm going to make a bold assertion here, and state that Luigi's Mansion for the GameCube may be one of the most overlooked Nintendo titles. And the current direction of the franchise, while good in its own right, pales in comparison to the enigmatic release which was the first in the series. Now, unlike Max Payne 3, I don't intend on going over the game's development history for brevity's sake. But it is important for you to know that Luigi's Mansion was the launch title for the GameCube. I will absolutely be calling back to this fact a little bit further down the road, as unsurprisingly, it is the source for a lot of the contention around this title. But for now, let me reinforce my claim and provide some context on why I like this game so damn much. I was raised on the GameCube. Being too young for the N64 and slightly too old when I received my Wii, the GameCube was my only fix for Nintendo titles other than my scratched up Game Boy. My brother and I would play Double Dash to no end, and my experience with Sunshine, despite its difficulty, was probably my favorite among all of the 3D Mario games. I was in love with this system, but the only title I was actually able to complete when I was younger was Luigi's Mansion. I played this game like 7 times, and it lived rent-free in my relatively small head. I would get recurring night terrors over the wardrobe guy, and the food guy, and this guy. Suffice to say, I was completely enamored by this game for a large portion of my youth. Luigi's Mansion was not like any game I had played before it. I was extremely young when I was exposed to this game, and I mean like between the age of 4 and 6 years old. So of course, I was highly impressionable at the time. This may not come as a shock due to my prior gaming experiences being various SpongeBob-related Game Boy titles, but Luigi's Mansion seriously changed my perspective on gaming as a whole. Everything from the start menu to the credits blew my mind. It was my introduction to horror in video games, boss encounters, and on some level, open world game design as a whole. Although the mansion may not exactly constitute an open world, but that's for smarter people than me to decide. The story, being a Nintendo title, is not the primary focus. It consists of Luigi winning the lottery, which he never bought a ticket for, and his reward? A massive mansion in the middle of nowhere. Luigi saw this as a normal occurrence, and when he went to claim his reward, it unsurprisingly turned out to be a trap. Let's not beat around the bush here. Luigi, he isn't the sharpest tool in the shed. So, this introduction? It works. Luigi then proceeds to find a Professor Egad, who tells him that there is some nefarious going-ons happening within the mansion. He gives Luigi a high-tech vacuum cleaner and the impossible task of capturing all the ghosts within the mansion. In the process of doing this, Luigi finds out that Mario came here under the same pretext, and unfortunately, he was captured by King Boo in the process of investigating. Luigi's goal evolves into saving his brother, and yeah, kidnappings are apparently commonplace in the Mushroom Kingdom. But I think this game does a good job at distinguishing itself from Mario titles and getting the player invested. I would even state that this game may have a narrative edge on Mario titles, as Peach getting kidnapped for the 50th time doesn't necessarily stand out, but when Mario gets captured, it does get the player a bit more invested. You go around the mansion searching for Mario with the help of the professor, and that's essentially the whole story. It's nothing groundbreaking, but compared to the story in most Mario titles, it's par for the course, if not a slight step up. Mechanically, this game was also pretty great, and a bit ahead of its time too. The vacuum physics and the lighting were impressive as hell for 2001, and honestly, I still think they're kind of impressive today. The elements you used throughout the game looked and functioned great, and the interactable environments added so much character to the mansion. Structurally, the game was almost a spiritual successor to the original Resident Evil games, and you can absolutely tell. The layout of Luigi's Mansion is not too dissimilar from Spencer Mansion, and the map almost operates in the exact same way. It even has the same door opening animations for when you unlock a new room. Now, with all these similarities, it may be hard to believe that I'm also a massive Resident Evil fan, but I doubt I would be if Luigi's Mansion hadn't introduced me to this style of game. With all the comparisons I've made between Luigi's Mansion and the Resident Evil titles, I would be remiss if I didn't clarify that Luigi's Mansion is not really a scary game. Yes, there are ghosts and ghouls and stuff, but it's all pretty tame, even for a child. Due to my age and inexperience with horror at the time though, this game absolutely scared the living shit out of me. GameCube titles as a whole were pretty creepy for a young me. From the bouncing cube thing to the plastic-like character models that were present in most cutscenes, there was something off about GameCube titles. So, with this pre-existing ominous perception of the GameCube, I was probably out the door when I booted Luigi's Mansion to hear this. Nintendo. The sound design in this game is generally incredible, and it adds so much to this title. It's spooky, and even replaying the game for this video, I still found some of the songs and sound effects to be generally unnerving. And to be honest, I wasn't really expecting this. And since I'm already praising the sounds within this game, I think now is a good time to bring up this game's incredible score. The orchestral pieces reach the high bar which other Nintendo games have set, and they pair with Luigi's humming extremely well. The mix between diegetic sounds and the game's soundtrack is extremely unique, and it makes this game much more memorable. Luigi will hum the main theme while an orchestra incorporates it into a cohesive song, almost as if it were just another instrument. I can't really think of many other games that do this, and it's a shame, as this feature gives so much more character to this title. The soundtrack is a huge contributor to the atmosphere of this game, and it absolutely elevates the horror aspects of it too. I assure you, it wasn't just the music though, as the bosses were also relatively creepy, and the darker segments in both tone and lighting horrified me as a child. I remember there were times when I would walk from a well-lit hallway to a pitch black room, and just immediately shut the console off. I wasn't good at coping with the horror aspects of this game at all, especially when the enemies looked as off-putting as they do. Actually, when I think about it, the enemy design as a whole was probably one of the largest contributors to the horror elements of this game for me, as each character was so unique with completely distinct attributes and methods of murdering Luigi. It almost ripped a page straight out of Ghostbusters, by making many of the ghosts look grotesque and sometimes unlike any human at all. To be extremely honest, the vacuum isn't too dissimilar from the Proton Pack, so there may be a bit more stylistic influence than just enemy design. These enemies were all exceptionally well crafted in their own right, and that's even before we talk about the bosses of this game. The bosses of this game were called portrait ghosts, each of which having their own gimmick you would need to learn before being able to beat them. Some of the most memorable moments from Luigi's Mansion was playing hide and seek with the twins, or playing Mario-related trivia with the pianist, or even spewing yarn straight into the grandma's face. There was just so much creativity when designing the portrait ghosts for this game. All of the bosses were exceptional, and I cannot remember a single bad one. What made them even more memorable was the backstories you would receive upon beating them, clearly stating how and when they died. This unnecessary, but extremely appreciated extra bit of info almost made me feel bad for the things I was capturing. Like, how did an infant have enough unfinished business to justify doing whatever this is to Luigi? In fact, the concept of this many kids being in the game is kind of dark, especially for a Nintendo title. However, this darkness didn't really stop me from vainly framing the toddler for eternity and hanging it in my house. This may be a good time to explain why the bosses in this game were called portrait ghosts. Each time you defeated one of these helpless souls, you slapped it into this machine and framed the thing, putting it in this kind of twisted museum EGAD has for some reason. To be quite honest, the fact that you could come back and visit old bosses, many of which were quite challenging for me as a child, was extremely rewarding. It's pretty cool to go and revel over your victories, the paintings being the trophies you earned from conquering each of these bosses. There are 23 of these portrait ghosts in total, 5 of which can be considered as the major bosses from this game. Each of the major bosses dispense a special key, which opens a new segment of the mansion, except, of course, for the final boss, which concludes the game. Speaking of the final boss, I found that it leverages the unique mechanics of this game super well, and it's probably the best fight in the game. So, with me praising the final boss to this degree, it may come as a shock when I state that King Boo isn't the defining enemy of any given playthrough. No, the mansion is. Each room in Luigi's mansion is incredibly distinct, sometimes having these oppressively dark and dingy characteristics, and others being impossibly fantastical in nature. When you compare the basement or the attic to the star or fortune teller's room, you see so much thematic diversity between the different segments of this map. Shockingly though, it all fits together, and it matches the tone which the game is trying to set. It is slightly cartoonish, allowing it to fit within the Mario universe with ease, but it can also be relatively dark. These elements combine to make a wholly unique map, and one which is shockingly cohesive. The game is able to restrict areas of the mansion using perpetual fires and magical doors, and all of this fits within the context of a Mario title extremely well, creating unique and interesting obstacles for the player to overcome throughout their experience. The player will also find that they have to contend with the mansion in this game. It will constantly be trying to trick you and combat your progress throughout the entirety of the experience. This makes the environment much more of a character in its own right, rather than just a set dressing. Luigi's Mansion also does a great job at hiding secrets, carrying over that Mario title tradition. You can find hidden areas which contain vast amounts of money, increasing the score which you achieve at the end. There's even one hidden area that contains a whole other portrait ghost, and a pretty unique one at that. The game makes it extremely rewarding to figure out what's behind those barricaded doors. Unfortunately, the rewards you receive in these hidden areas are entirely unimpactful for the rest of your experience. I would actually say that the lack of meaningful reward could be considered one of this game's major flaws. You get money for exploring the map, discovering new areas, defeating enemies, banging on chests, drawers, cabinets, and practically anything within Luigi's cone of vision. With all this currency constantly being thrown at the player, it may seem counterintuitive to have no meaningful way to spend it. Unfortunately, the money in this game works similarly to the point system in the original Mario titles. It's mainly there just for overachievers to attempt some high scores. And while the score you get does actually change the ending, it's in an extremely minor fashion. You still win, no matter what, and at least in my eyes, it really doesn't matter what kind of house Luigi replaces the mansion with, or what ranking the player receives. The Boo capturing system compounds with this problem, basically creating more side content without any meaningful reward. For context, almost every single time you clear a room, the light turns on and a special ghost hides in an object within it. Your job is to sniff it out using a scanner and capture the thing. Unfortunately, unlike other enemies, the Boos are not fazed by your vacuum, leading for them to just constantly escape, traveling through the walls to do so. This isn't too difficult if they entered the adjacent room, as then it's easy for you to just travel right over there and re-engage in the fight. But if they decide to go through walls which require you to travel throughout the entire map to reach it, then it becomes way more tedious and a serious problem for pacing. It also doesn't help that these enemies can have extremely large health bars, and they all play the exact same way. Now, if the Boos were just side content to get a bit more money, I would say it's not worth it, but it doesn't really hinder the experience that much. But since the player is required to capture 40 of them to fight King Boo, it's a bit tedious. And for the overachievers that desire to capture all 50 of them, you get a gold diamond, which you lose if you close the game or die after receiving it, which I did, having my game crash due to unexpected circumstances right after picking up the thing. Since the game saved right after I captured the final ghost, and right before I picked up the diamond, it reloaded me to the entrance of the mansion without any reward. If I want to reclaim the diamond and go back to where I picked it up, it would just not be there. Now, if the Boos had a more meaningful reward for capturing them all, like potentially another portrait ghost or an alternative ending, and they were less spongy and more diverse, then it could potentially be worth it. But the fact is that the reward is only a bit of money, and fighting them is extremely tedious, making them a quite uninteresting side objective. The side content in this game is generally speaking a mixed bag. And while some of it is good, I believe that most of it is just there to pad out the length of the experience. This transitions quite well into my next point, as Luigi's Mansion can be beaten in 4 hours. This is a huge problem, for two reasons, one of which I'm now going to call back to, as I presented at the beginning of this video. This was the launch title for the GameCube. Mario Sunshine, what was going to be the system seller, was delayed by a whole year. With Sunshine out of the picture, Luigi's Mansion had massive shoes to fill for early investors of the console. Unfortunately, a 4-hour, full-priced game was not going to cut it, and this definitely was represented in console sales. Nintendo fans were not praising this game for the unique gem it was, they were panning it for not being able to carry the release window of the console. I believe that this is a large reason why the game took 12 years to get a follow-up, and why that follow-up was a portable 3DS game which was developed by a peripheral studio. I think that now is as good of a time as any to introduce the rest of the franchise. When I was younger, I would repeatedly ask my older sibling if there was any news pertaining to a sequel for the original Luigi's Mansion. I wanted so bad for there to be a follow-up, and in my mind, it would contain multiple mansions with significantly more portrait ghosts, much better side content, and possibly more upgrades for Luigi's ghost-catching arsenal. I loved the first game a lot, and I believe that there was so much that the series could do, most of which was only briefly touched upon in the original's 4-hour runtime. Eventually there was a sequel, and I was extremely excited for it, even after the what turned out to be 12-year hiatus from the franchise. There was rumors of multiple mansions as I had previously wanted, each of which sporting its own unique theme. I was very excited for this game, and when it finally came out, I unfortunately kind of wished it was never released. Don't get me wrong, many people really like this game, and I can acknowledge that. Quality-wise, it's most likely pretty good. But when I booted it for the first time on the 3DS and saw that mission select screen, it felt like a massive slap in the face to fans of the original. To make it a portable title with more cartoonish aesthetics, dropping all of the darker characteristics of the first was a huge blunder. And making it a title without any portrait ghosts, no real exploration, yeah, it was a bit too much of a pivot for me to enjoy. But even after this game's release, I was still hopeful for a true successor to the original. The second game sold, so the series wasn't entirely dead, and that alone was enough for me to remain hopeful for a third entry which could be more like the first. Shockingly, we almost received this. The third Luigi's Mansion for the Switch is actually pretty great, and even though I never came around to finishing it, the 10 hours I put in the game was extremely fun. Luigi is my new favorite Mario character, and the visual style is closer to what I wanted from the second entry. Its gameplay is a touch more diverse and a bit more difficult, making it more suitable for a modern audience of experienced gamers. The unavoidable truth, though, is that this game still feels pretty distant from the first, and more like a sequel to the second. The game's levels being segmented by floors of a hotel is pretty cool, but still pales in comparison to the open mansion from the first, even if it is a better way of segmenting levels than whatever this is. Now, this may be the last mainline entry into the series which we have received, but it's definitely not the last Luigi's Mansion game which we have been graced with. Let me introduce you to the brand new Luigi's Mansion remake. Those bastards at Nintendo decided to put the game on a console which is on its deathbed over the Nintendo Switch. They waited 5 months after the remake's launch to announce that the game would be the last one on the damn system, so why not just release it on the Switch? It looks like shit in 3D, and the Switch needed games at that time, so why not? It's such a piss off, and I feel like they actively hate the game and refuse to make it widely accessible. Due to this, I wouldn't blame anybody for emulating the thing. In fact, there may potentially be links in the description for you to do so. God! I may sound overly bitter about the direction which the series has decided to take, but even I will state that there is still hope for a future game recapturing the beauty of the first. The hotel was a step in the right direction, it just needs to feel less segmented and much more open as an experience. If they could take the diverse themes of the hotel floors and condense it into rooms within a larger, more connected map for the fourth entry, we could return to the magic of the first title. Other than that, trash those new ghost designs that look straight out of a low-budget Nickelodeon show, and bring back the old creepy Ghostbusters-looking ghosts, and we're set. I may have a bias for the first Luigi's Mansion, but I still think it's vastly superior to the titles we have now. I know that I would still happily wait for return to form for the franchise, and if Nintendo decides to greenlight a project like this, I would be ecstatic. The first was a staple of my youth, and I enjoyed every second I got to spend with that game. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end though. And my mother, being the brave soul that she is, confiscated the GameCube for a summer. But possibly even more unfortunately, this summer-long ban from gaming became indefinite when she could no longer remember where she had placed the box. Now, she never liked us playing games, and I'm not going to throw around any accusations, but a couple years later, my mom just happened to find the thing right beside her treadmill, which she uses almost every single day. But what's done is done, and Luigi's Mansion was eventually back in my hands once again. I say this now as quite similarly to my mother tearing Luigi's Mansion away from me, I must tear this video away from you. I will be back soon though, most likely in the coming weeks, and with this, there's an incredibly small chance that you may find me beside your mother's treadmill. Now, go outside, touch some grass, or do whatever you were doing not only a couple minutes ago, as I have now expelled all of my thoughts on this classic title.